Hi, what's up YouTube? This is Josh with Boosted Creations again. I'm with Nathan Jenkins about his 3 and 6. What year is it again?
85.
85, and it's originally a 2+2?
2+2.
Alright, tell us a little bit about the motor that you kind of got set up for it.
I have assembled a VG33 ET, which is basically it's a Nissan Pathfinder 3.3 liter V6. I've done a little bit of different things to it, which I've taken the crankshaft out of a 3 liter and the cams out of the 3 liter also, so that instead of having the low end torque that the motor would have naturally had being in a truck, it will have a much more acceptable power band for this car. Also, I've swapped over all the turbo components. It's got a T3 Garrett turbo factory from Nissan. It's got the factory turbo injectors, and it's not really a performance build other than the fact that I'm going from a 3 liter motor to a 3.3 liter motor, going from a naturally aspirated motor to a turbo motor. Plan on running anywhere between 7 to 10 pounds of boost, which should give me 350 horsepower, give or take. Future plans, maybe a TO4 upgrade, bigger injectors, Miz-tune. It's got a stage 3 6-puck spring racing clutch in it, because why not at this point? I've spent so much money, why not? Also, I've taken the factory oil cooler that came on the turbo automatic versions of these cars, so they're kind of hard to find, and it is now in the car and on the motor, so I will have a factory Nissan oil cooler, which is kind of cool. You don't see that a lot. Other than that, I mean, it's going to go like stink, hopefully. Should have, I think, a 8.9 to 1 compression ratio, and 7 to 10 pounds of boost. It should be fun. You have to do a lot of research before you get involved with one of these, because while it looks pretty straightforward on paper until you're actually sitting there with a camshaft in your hand and a rocker cover in the other, you don't actually know what you're doing. And I was fortunate because I got this motor, had a lot of miles on it, 180,000 miles, but I tore it apart and everything was good. I ended up changing the main bearings, changing the rod bearings, obviously changing the crank. Again, why wouldn't you? It's got a new VG30 oil pump on it, new front rear main seal, new timing belt, new water pump, new thermostat, new cam seals, head gaskets new, intake manifold, everything on this motor with the exception of the block is new. It's even got new rings in it. I went ahead and honed the cylinders, put new rings in it, because I'm already this deep in a hole, why not just dig to China? And like I said, should go like steam. I already had to change the turbo cross member in it, I had to put a new cross member in it, I had to do a bunch of other stuff, so I bought a parts car. And fortunately, the parts car had a complete analog dash with the wiring and everything, so I've swapped all of that over. So I have a functional speedometer, I have a functional tachometer, I have a gas gauge that works, I have all this cool stuff that I've not had before. And I'm actually excited about getting to drive the car and look down and be like, oh, I'm going at 3,000 RPM. That's cool.
What was the process of actually getting all that swapped over?
It is not easy, but it's also not difficult. The internet is a wonderful thing. You are able to look up all kinds of stuff on the internet. Fortunately, I've had this dash out of this car before, so I know how to take the dash out. If you don't know how to take the dash out, there are websites you can look up to do it. Basically, we've all taken the dash out, taking the dash out of the parts car, taking all the wiring harness and everything from the inside of the dash, and swapping it. My dash was in better shape than the parts car was, so I just put it all into my dash. Really the hardest thing about the swap was running the speedometer cable through the firewall. That was really the hardest thing, only because
thick cable going down.
yeah, that thick cable right there going down the transmission. That was the only hardest part because I had done it before. If you've never done it before, you're gonna be lost. It's not gonna be fun. That was probably the easiest of the tasks I had to do with this car to get it to the point where it's almost ready to run once the motor. It's hard if you know what you're doing, but if you don't know what you're doing, it can be a very intimidating process. If you're mechanically inclined and you can read and reason, you shouldn't have too much trouble. But if you have difficulties with any of those things, I wouldn't necessarily suggest it unless you have somebody that can help you with it. Other conversions I've had to do is got an electric fan on it because mechanical fans, why would you even run a mechanical fan anymore? You can go to your parts store and get an electric fan for $30 or something like that, ridiculous. It has an upgraded fuel pump in it, but I did that well before I built the motor. It has the oil cooler in it from the turbo model. It's got an aftermarket boost sensor, so I can actually see real-time boost without having to rely upon the factory boost gauge, which, while it's not bad, it only goes up to 7 psi, so if you want to go more than that, it's not going to help you any, because all it's going to say is you're going 7, and you know, that's great and all that, but it's not fantastic.
All right, so now what about this belt layout versus the other models?
Yes, if you do the turbo conversion on your naturally aspirated engine, you're going to run into difficulty with specifically your alternator water pump, because the turbo models, to accommodate the turbo, have the alternator located on the other side. As such, for some odd reason, Nissan also decided to change it from a V-belt to a ribbed belt, which this here is actually the naturally aspirated water pump pulley. As you can see, it is a V-belt pulley. This is a ribbed belt. So you will need to either use the turbo alternator, turbo water pump pulleys to make this work, as well as having the bracket and the adjuster, or you can swap over your naturally aspirated parts onto this particular setup. So in that case, you would have to use your naturally aspirated crank pulley, because that's really the only difference between the two, which everybody will tell you. If you're doing a turbo swap, you have to have a turbo crank pulley. Look it up, they'll all tell you. You don't. You just have to be willing to essentially run what you already have and make it work. The problem with that also is this belt length. This is a little bit longer of a belt because the alternator actually sticks further out on this side than it did normally over here. So you would just have to go to your parts store and just find something close to the right length, because you do have a lot of movement in terms of adjustability on that alternator. Other than that, everything else is the same. If you run power steering, the power steering belt's the same. If you run AC, then that's also the same, which this motor has an AC delete on it, so there's no air conditioning compressor on it. If you want to just put a VG33 in your 300 and not modify anything, just leave it a stock VG33, you're going to have a little bit of difficulty because of you're going to have to use a 300ZX oil pan, which this one obviously has a 300ZX oil pan on it. My non-turbo oil pan, it's over there, it's the same thing except for but you'll have to use the 300ZX oil pan so it'll clear the cross member. But on this motor originally, it has a front-mounted oil filter on the oil pump, and the pickup is different because the oil pan's different. I think the sump is in the front, Something may be in the back on the VG33s. I don't remember exactly. But the sump is different, the pickup's different. So you either have to modify the pickup to work with the 300ZX sump, or change oil pumps, which if you change the oil pump, you have to change the crank. Because here on the factory VG33 crank, this snout right here is about twice as long as it is on just the regular 3 liter. If I had a regular 3 liter crank, I'd show you that too, but. So, a lot of people, like I said, I've done it before, where you just modify the pickup and it works. But otherwise, you have to do the crank swap. And if you do the crank swap, you might as well do the cam swap, because otherwise you're going to have to get adapters and stuff to make the timing belt work. Because on the 3.3s, if you actually look, these are 3.3 cams in this 3 liter, because I just stuck them in here because I needed somewhere to put them. That cam gear is actually very slightly different here from the 3 liter. That's a 3 liter cam gear, and that's a 3.3 cam gear. That one's actually rounded, as where that one's straight. You can see the difference right there. So if you try and run, for example, a 3.3 timing belt on a 3 liter cam gear, you're gonna be bending valves real quick, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So that's just a little insight for anybody trying to build one of these. I also get a lot of questions on the forums about doing the turbo conversions on these, in which the oil pickup for the turbo. I have heard different conflicting stories. This is the first one I've actually built to turbo. I've built regular VG33s, naturally aspirated, dropped them in a car. But the big question is about the oil pickup, oil feed I should say, for the turbo, which is right here. As to whether you have to, if that's already drilled and tapped out for you from the factory. And this is a 98 motor. And it was already drilled and tapped. I've heard other stories that some of the later models, like 2000, 2001, 2002, they're not. You'd have to drill it out and tap it. Not a real big deal. I'm sure the plug's already there. But the block is, for all intents and purposes, identical. With the exception that this one says VG30 back here, and this one says VG30. I actually called around to a bunch of local machine shops around here, and we're near a pretty big city that has a lot of machine shops. And I just wanted to get prices on how much it would cost to do valve stem seals on these. 2 out of the 3 I called laughed at me and told me that they won't work on import engines, which I promptly responded to saying, well, it was made here in Tennessee, so it's not really an import, is it? They didn't like that too much. So needless to say, I did not end up taking my heads to a shop to have them fixed. Didn't really need to, I just did it as a courtesy because, again, why wouldn't you when you have it all apart? But they didn't like that too much, and that's another thing that if you've never done before and you have no clue how to do, don't try and do them, because they suck. They suck hard. Not really, they're not too bad, but.
Like compared to a small block 350.
Oh yeah, that you can do in the parking lot while your girlfriend goes and gets a hamburger. Yeah. This also has EGR delete on it, because this car is 33 years old. Will be 34 in March. And this lovely state, the lovely county that we live in, actually has emissions, and this car wouldn't pass it in 1985. So I have antique plates. So it will not need an EGR valve because I don't have to go through emissions.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned next week where we introduce Twisted Creations' own special rally project.